day, having covered half the distance to the Kumaji settlement, they began to encounter Kumaji patrols, on foot or thlotback, the six-legged desert animals running so swiftly over the sands and so low to the ground that they almost seemed to be gliding. Steve and Mary hardly spoke. Talk was unnecessary, but slowly a bond grew between them. Steve liked this slim, silent girl, who had come out here with him risking her life, although she must have known deep in her heart that her father had almost certainly decided to turn traitor in order to regain his fortune. On the fourth day, they spotted the unicopter from a long way off and made their way toward it. It had come much further than Steve had expected. With sinking heart, he realized that Tobias Whiting, if he escaped the crash landing without injury, must surely have reached the Kumaji encampment by now. "It doesn't seem badly damaged," Mary said. The platform had buckled slightly, the copter was tilted over, one of the rotors twisted, its end buried in sand. Tobias Whiting wasn't there. "No," Steve said. "It's hardly damaged at all. Your father got out of it all right." "To go to them?" "I think so, Mary. I don't want to pass judgment until we're sure. I'm sorry." "Oh, Steve, Steve, what will we do? What can we do?" "Find him, if it isn't too late. Come on." "North?" "North." "And if by some miracle we find him?" Steve said nothing. The answer, capture or death, was obvious. But you couldn't tell that to a trader's daughter, could you? As it turned out, they did not find Tobias Whiting through their own efforts. Half an hour after setting out from the unicopter, they were spotted by a roving band of Kumajis, who came streaking toward them on their thlots. Mary raised her atto rifle, but Steve struck the barrel aside. "They'd kill us," he said. "We can only surrender." They were hobbled and led painfully across the sand. They were taken away to a small Kumaji encampment and thrust within a circular tent. Tobias Whiting was in there. "Mary!" he cried. "My God! Mary!" "We came for you, Dad," she said coldly. "To stop you. To kill you if necessary." "Mary! Oh, Dad! Why did you do it? Why?" "We couldn't start all over again, could we? You have a right to live the sort of life I planned for you. You—" "Whiting," Steve said. "Did you tell them yet?" No, I haven't. I have information to trade, sure. But I want to make sure it's going to the right people. I want to get our— Dad, our money and all those deaths." "It doesn't matter now. I had changed my mind, Mary. Truly. But now that you're a prisoner, what if I don't talk? Don't you see? They'll torture you. They'll make you talk. And that way, we get nothing. I couldn't stand to see them hurt you." "They can do what they think they have to do. I'll tell them nothing." "You won't have to," Whiting said. "I'll tell them when we reach the larger settlement. They're taking us there tomorrow, they told me." "Then we've got to get out of here tonight," Steve said. The low sun cast the shadow of their guard against the thlotskin wall of their tent. He was a single man, armed with a long, pike-like weapon. When darkness came, if the guard were not increased— They were brought a nasty gruel for their supper, and ate in silence and distaste. Ate because they needed the strength. Mary said, "Dad, I don't want you to tell them anything. Dad, please. If you thought you were doing it for me—" "I've made up my mind," Tobias Whiting said. Mary turned to Steve in despair. "Steve," she said, "Steve, do whatever you have to do. I'll understand." Steve didn't answer her. Wasn't Whiting right now, he thought? If Steve silenced him, wouldn't the Kumaji torture them for the information? Steve could stand up to it perhaps, but he couldn't stand to see them hurt Mary. He'd talk if they did that. Then, silencing Whiting wasn't the answer. But the Kumajis had one willing prisoner and two unwilling ones. They knew that. If the willing one yelled for help, but the yelling was kept to a minimum so only one guard, the man outside, came. Darkness in the Kumaji encampment. Far off, a lone tribesman singing a chant old as the desert. "Are you asleep?" Mary asked. "No," Steve said. "Dad is. Listen to the way he's breathing, like a baby, as if he wasn't going to betray all our people. Oh, I hate him! I hate him!" Steve crawled to where the older man was sleeping. Tobias Whiting's voice surprised him. "I'm not asleep. I was thinking. I'm going to kill you," Steve said very softly, and sprang at Whiting. He paused, though. It was a calculated pause, and Whiting cried out as Steve had hoped he would. Then his hands found the older man's throat and closed there. Not to kill him, but to keep him from crying out again. Sand stirred, the tent flap lifted, and a bulky figure rushed inside. Steve got up, met him halfway, felt the jarring contact of their bodies. The pike came up dimly in the darkness, the point scraping against Steve's ribs as the guard lunged awkwardly. Steve's fingers sought the thick-muscled neck, clamped there, squeezing. The guard writhed. His feet drummed the sand. With one hand he stabbed out wildly with the unwieldy pike. There was a cry from Mary, and the guard managed a low, squawking noise. Outside, the rest of the camp seemed undisturbed. There was death in Steve's strong, tightening fingers. There had to be death there. Death for the Kumaji guard, or death for the fleeing Earthmen, who had lost one colony and must seek another. They fell together on the sand, the guard still struggling. Steve couldn't release his throat to grab the pike. The guard stabbed out awkwardly, blindly with it, kicking up sand. Then Tobias Whiting moaned, but Steve hardly heard him. When the guard's legs stopped drumming, Steve released him. The man was either dead or so close to death that he would be out for hours. Steve had never killed a man before, had never in violence and with intent to kill attacked a man. "Steve!" It was Mary, calling his name and crying. "It's Dad. Dad was hit. The pike. A wild stab. He's hit bad." Steve crawled over to them. It was very dark. He could barely make out Tobias Whiting's pain-contorted face. "My stomach," Whiting said, gasping for breath. "The pain." Steve probed with his hands, found the wound. Blood was rushing out. He couldn't stop it, and he knew it, and he thought Whiting knew it too. He touched Mary's hand and held it. Mary sobbed against him, crying softly. "You too," Whiting gasped. "You too, Mary, Mary girl. Is he what you want?" "Yes, Dad. Oh, yes." "You can get her out of here, Cantwell?" "I think so," Steve said. "Then go. Go while you can. I'll tell them due south. The Earthmen are heading due south. They'll go south. They won't find the caravan. You'll all get away. If it's what you want, Mary." She leaned away from Steve, kissing her father. She asked Steve, "Isn't there anything we can do for him?" Steve shook his head. "But he's got to live long enough to tell them, to deceive them." "I'll live long enough," Whiting said, and Steve knew then that he would. "Luck to all of you. From a very foolish man." Steve took Mary's hand and pulled her out into the hot, dark, wind-blown night. He carried the dead Kumaji's pike, and they slipped it across the sand to where the thlots were hobbled for the night. He hardly remembered the rest of it. There was violence and death, but necessary death. He killed a man